In a dark neighborhood where streetlights died one by one, a black car stopped. Marcus Volkov, the man whose name made entire cities afraid, saw a woman holding a small child by the roadside in pouring rain. She said she was a single mother, jobless, needing shelter for one night. He, the man who once made the whole city tremble, fell silent before those desperate eyes. He gave her work, a place to stay, and slowly, his heart. But he did not know that the poor mother was actually the mysterious CEO of an investment corporation, conducting a test to find out who truly still had a heart. The rain fell like judgment that night, cold and relentless, turning the streets into rivers of reflected neon. Marcus Volkov had just left a meeting, where he had ordered the destruction of a rival's operation, where he had spoken words that would end careers and possibly lives. His hands were clean, but his conscience was buried so deep he had forgotten it existed. Then his headlights caught her. A woman pressed against a brick wall, holding a child wrapped in a thin blanket. Her clothes were soaked through. The child's face was pale against her shoulder. He should have driven past. Every instinct he had cultivated over 20 years in this business told him to keep moving, that compassion was a luxury men like him could not afford. But something in the way she held that child, the fierce protection in her posture, the desperation in her eyes when she looked up at his approaching car, made him stop. He rolled down the window. Rain immediately began soaking his leather interior. "Please," she said, and her voice broke on that single word. "My daughter and I, we just need somewhere warm. Just one night. I can work. I can clean. Anything." She did not beg. She did not cry. She simply stated her need with a dignity that felt like an accusation against everything he had become. Marcus looked at the child. The girl could not have been more than 5 years old, sleeping against her mother's chest despite the cold and wet, trusting completely in arms that could not protect her from rain. Something shifted in his chest, some long-buried thing he had thought dead. "Get in," he said. The woman hesitated, and he saw her calculate the risk. A strange man in an expensive car in a neighborhood where expensive cars only came for violence or vice. But then the child shivered, and the calculation ended. She climbed into the back seat, murmuring thank you over and over, holding her daughter close. Marcus drove without speaking, taking them to his house, the fortress he had built where no one asked questions about the men who came and went at odd hours. When they pulled through the gates, her eyes widened at the mansion, at the obvious wealth. She pulled her daughter closer, suddenly wary. "I run a security business," he said, which was not entirely a lie. "You will be safe here." He led them inside past Victor and Dmitri, who stood with weapons barely concealed, past expensive art on walls, into a guest room unused for years. "You can sleep here tonight. Tomorrow we talk about work." The woman laid her daughter on the bed. The child stirred, opened her eyes for just a moment. "Mama," she whispered. "We are safe now, Lily," the woman said softly. "Sleep." Then she turned to Marcus, and in the lamp's soft light, he saw her face clearly for the first time. She was younger than he had thought, maybe 30, with dark hair and eyes the color of coffee. "My name is Elena. Thank you for your kindness." Kindness. The word felt foreign. He nodded and left before he could say something foolish, before he could ask why a woman like her was on streets with a child, before he could offer more than he should. But as he walked down the hallway, he heard her singing. A lullaby in a language he did not recognize, soft and sweet, full of tenderness he had not heard in 7 years, not since Grace had sung to Samuel, not since they both died in his rose garden while he was away, bleeding from bullets meant for him. Marcus stopped. He stood in the hallway and listened to a stranger sing to her child, and for the first time in 7 years, he felt something other than rage and emptiness. The next morning brought sunlight that felt almost apologetic after the previous night's storm. Marcus woke to unfamiliar sounds, the clatter of pans, the running of water, voices in his kitchen. He came downstairs to find Elena cooking breakfast, somehow having located eggs and vegetables in his rarely used refrigerator. His men stood in the doorway, Victor and Dmitri and 3 others, caught between suspicion and something that looked dangerously like hope. She served them scrambled eggs and toast as if they were construction workers instead of criminals. She poured coffee. She asked them about their families, their mothers, whether they took sugar or cream. Victor, who had not smiled since his daughter was killed by a rival gang, actually laughed at something she said. Marcus felt panic rising in his chest. His entire world operated on fear. People obeyed him because they were terrified of what he might do. This woman was dissolving that fear with breakfast and kindness, and he did not know how to stop her or if he even wanted to. After the men left, he pulled Elena aside, keeping his voice low and controlled. "I will arrange work for you. Light cleaning, organization, helping around the house. Nothing that requires references or background checks." She nodded, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Then she said something that stopped his heart. "I noticed your garden, the roses especially. They are dying. May I try to save them?" He had not been in that garden since Grace died there 7 years ago. He had locked the gate and let everything rot, a monument to his failure to protect what mattered. But hearing this stranger ask permission to enter that sacred, terrible place, he found himself unable to refuse. "Do what you want with it," he said, and walked away before she could see his face. That afternoon, Elena knelt in the dirt with Lily beside her, showing the child how to prune dead branches and clear weeds from roots that had forgotten sunlight. Marcus watched from an upstairs window, hands pressed against glass, remembering another woman who had loved roses, another child who had picked petals and called them gifts. The ache in his chest was unbearable and necessary, like breathing after drowning. Elena worked with the kind of knowledge that suggested education, training, something beyond what a homeless woman should possess. She knew which branches to cut, how to feed the soil, where to direct water. By evening, the garden looked less like a graveyard and more like something that might remember how to live. When she came inside, dirt under her fingernails and sweat on her forehead, she smiled at him. "They will bloom again," she said with such certainty that he almost believed her. "Everything that looks dead is just waiting for someone to remember it matters." He did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. But that night, he found himself standing at the window again, looking down at the garden she had touched, wondering if resurrection was possible for roses and if it might also be possible for men. By the third day, Elena had somehow convinced Marcus to teach Lily about machines. He found himself in his garage with the child sitting on the concrete floor, small hands gripping a wrench while he showed her how engines fit together, how every piece had a purpose. "Everything connects," he told her, surprised by the patience in his own voice. "Even the smallest bolt holds something larger in place. Remove it, and everything falls apart." Lily studied him with solemn brown eyes. "Are you a bolt, Mr. Marcus?" she asked. The question landed like a bullet he could not dodge. He opened his mouth to answer, found no words that made sense. Elena appeared in the garage doorway, flour dusting her hands from making bread that filled the house with smells he had forgotten existed. She met his gaze and said nothing, but something passed between them that felt like permission to be more than what he had been, an invitation to remember he was human before he was dangerous. That night, Marcus found himself at the piano for the first time in 7 years. His fingers moved across keys, finding the unfinished melody he had started composing the day Samuel was born. The song had no ending, just phrases that circled back on themselves like grief with nowhere to land. He did not hear Elena enter. He did not know she stood behind him until her hand rested lightly on his shoulder. "That is beautiful," she whispered. "It sounds like love that has not found its ending yet." His fingers stilled on ivory. "Some songs are not meant to be finished," he said, voice rough as gravel. She sat beside him on the bench, not touching the keys, just sitting in the music's aftermath. "My husband died 2 years ago. Cancer. 38 years old. And I watched him disappear piece by piece. I thought grief would kill me. But it did not. It just taught me how to carry impossible weight." Marcus stared at his hands, scarred and deadly, resting on keys meant for beauty. "My wife and son died in this house," he said. "An enemy found out where I lived. Grace tried to protect Samuel. They both bled out in the rose garden before I got home. She was holding him when I found them. He was 4 years old. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of all the words that could not fix what was broken, full of shared understanding of what it meant to survive the unsurvivable. "I am sorry," Elena said quietly. "I know those words are useless, but I do not have better ones." He turned to look at her finally. Really look at her, this woman who had appeared in his life like rain in a desert. "You brought them back. The roses. I thought they were dead, but you made them live again." She held his gaze, steady and unafraid. "Some things are not dead, Marcus. They are just waiting for someone to remember they matter." He wanted to tell her she was dangerous, that she was making him feel things he had buried for good reason, that hope was the cruelest thing you could give a man like him. Instead, he just sat beside her on the piano bench while night fell outside, and somewhere in the house, her daughter slept safe and warm. And for a moment, just a moment, he let himself imagine this could last. Within a week, Elena had transformed his house in ways Marcus could not have imagined. The roses in the garden bloomed blood-red and defiant, drinking sunlight like they had been starved for it. She hung wind chimes on the porch that sang in languages of copper and brass, melodies that filled empty spaces with something other than silence. She convinced his men to eat dinner together at an actual table, instead of standing in corners like sentries guarding empty rooms. Laughter, that endangered species, began returning to halls that had known only silence and strategy. Even the walls seemed less gray, as if her presence gave the house permission to be something other than a fortress. Marcus would watch her from windows, this strange woman who moved through his world of violence as if it were merely a room needing better lighting. She organized his books, cleaned his study, left fresh flowers on his desk. She did not flinch when his phone rang with coded messages about shipments and territories. She did not ask questions when Victor came back with blood on his shirt. She simply existed in his house like sunlight, indifferent to the shadows it revealed. But his lieutenant Dmitri, a man with a scar running from temple to jaw and instincts sharpened by 30 years of survival, pulled Marcus aside one evening. "Boss, we ran her background. Something is off. She is too educated for someone who claims homelessness. Her hands are soft, not a laborer's hands. And she knows things, strategic things, the way she arranges rooms, how she handles logistics." Marcus felt his jaw tighten, felt the old armor sliding back into place. So she is hiding something. Are we not all? Dmitri pressed forward, loyalty making him brave. She could be law enforcement. Or worse, a rival. This could be an elaborate setup. The woman, the child, all of it designed to get inside your walls. Marcus turned to face him fully, and when he spoke, his voice was quiet and dangerous. "Then I would rather be deceived by someone who makes my house feel like a home than live safely in this tomb. Do you understand me?" Dmitri nodded slowly, but his eyes held warning. "Just remember, boss, the heart is the easiest organ to kill. It is already so exposed, already so vulnerable, and in our world, vulnerability is death." That night, Marcus stood in the garden Elena had brought back to life, touching rose petals that felt like silk and secrets. Moonlight painted everything silver. Somewhere behind him, the house glowed with warm light, and he could hear Elena singing Lily to sleep through an open window. He knew Dmitri was right. He knew he was walking toward destruction with his eyes wide open, inviting betrayal into his home, lowering defenses it had taken decades to build. But for the first time in 7 years, he felt something other than the weight of his own violence. He felt hope. And hope, he was learning, was more dangerous and more necessary than any weapon he had ever carried. He stood in the garden until the moon set, until the roses released their perfume into cooling air, until he could convince himself that maybe, just maybe, resurrection was possible for more than flowers. That same night, Elena's phone buzzed with a message she read in the bathroom with the door locked. The screen's light made her face ghostly in the mirror. Status report required. Observation period concludes in 72 hours. She stared at her reflection, at the woman she had become in this house of contradictions. The woman who baked bread for criminals. The woman who held a mafia boss's hand while he wept over piano keys in the dark. She had come here as part of an experiment, a carefully designed test created by the Heart Foundation, the organization she had built from nothing after her husband David died. They identified powerful men who lived in moral gray zones, men of influence who existed between law and lawlessness, and tested them with a simple question: would they help the helpless when cruelty was easier? The methodology was clinical. Go undercover as someone vulnerable. Present as desperate, in need, worthy of either compassion or contempt. Document their responses. Measure their capacity for empathy. She had done this dozens of times over 3 years, testing politicians who spoke of justice while ignoring suffering, testing business executives who claimed values while exploiting workers, even testing a warlord once who had surprised her by sharing his food. She was supposed to remain detached, observational, scientific, a researcher studying human behavior in controlled conditions. But Marcus had taught her daughter about machines with a patience that made her throat close. He had saved the roses because she asked him to, entering a garden that clearly held unbearable memories. He had played her an unfinished song about grief and trusted her with his most terrible loss. The test was compromised. She was compromised. She typed, "Requesting extension. Situation more complex than anticipated. Subject displaying unexpected depth of character requiring additional observation time." Then she deleted it and wrote simply, "Confirmed. Will report findings as scheduled." When she emerged, Marcus stood in the hallway holding a small velvet box. For a moment, she thought he knew, thought this was the confrontation, the end. But his face held only uncertainty and something that looked like fear. "I want you to have this," he said, opening the box to reveal a silver bracelet, simple and delicate, the kind of gift that meant something beyond its monetary value. "I bought it for Grace but never gave it to her. She died before I found the courage. I have kept it for 7 years, and it has only collected dust and regret." Elena's throat closed around words she could not speak. "Marcus, I cannot. If you ever leave," he interrupted, voice rough with something that might have been desperation, "at least carry something that reminds you some of us are still trying to be human, that some of us can be saved." She let him fasten it around her wrist, and the metal felt like evidence, like a promise she had no right to make, like a chain connecting her to a man she was supposed to be studying, but had accidentally learned to love. The bracelet was cold at first, then warmed against her skin, becoming part of her in a way that terrified her more than any threat his world could offer. She looked up at him, this dangerous man with gentle hands, and knew that when the truth came, it would destroy them both. The truth arrived 3 days later like an execution, swift and merciless. Victor came to Marcus with a folder, his face carefully blank, and inside were photographs that destroyed everything. Elena in a tailored suit cutting ribbons at charity galas. Elena shaking hands with senators and celebrity philanthropists. Elena on the cover of a business magazine with the headline "The CEO Who Tests Hearts." Elena Castellano's radical approach to measuring compassion. Marcus read the article in silence that stretched like torture. The Heart Foundation. $100 million allocated to studying human compassion in unexpected places. She had gone undercover dozens of times over 3 years, testing everyone from politicians to warlords, documenting their responses, measuring their capacity for empathy, publishing her findings. He was just another experiment, another subject in her research, another data point in her study of human nature. The bracelet on her wrist in the magazine photograph gleamed like betrayal made metal. When Elena returned from the grocery store, arms full of ingredients for dinner she would never cook, she found Marcus sitting in the garden surrounded by the roses she had brought back to life. They bloomed around him like witnesses to her crime. Red petals opened towards sun that suddenly felt cruel. She knew immediately. The way he held himself, the magazine in his hands, the absolute stillness of a predator deciding how to kill. He held up the magazine without looking at her. A test. His voice was empty of everything that made him human, flat and cold as stone. "I was a test, an experiment, a subject." She set down the groceries, bags spilling vegetables onto grass that had learned to grow again because of her care. It started that way, she admitted, because lying now would be another violence. "But Marcus, please listen." "No." He stood, and she watched him put on his armor again, watched him become the man who made cities afraid, the man who had killed without hesitation before she appeared. "You came into my house. You held my grief like it was sacred. You let your daughter call me uncle. You let me believe." His voice broke, then hardened again. "You let me believe I could be human again." He threw the bracelet at her feet, silver glinting in sunlight. "Was it good data? Did the monster pass your test? Will you publish a paper about how even killers can be manipulated with a woman and a child?" She knelt, picked up the bracelet with hands that shook so badly she could barely hold it. "You did more than pass. You made me forget why I came. You made me fall in love with you, and I was not supposed to. It was not supposed to be real. But it is, Marcus. It is the most real thing I have ever felt." But he was already walking away, already rebuilding the walls she had somehow broken through, already becoming the man who could not be hurt because he refused to feel. "Get out," he said without turning around. "Take your daughter and get out before I remember what I am, and what I do to people who deceive me." She watched him disappear into the house, and the roses kept blooming, indifferent to endings. She should have left. Should have taken Lily and disappeared into the safety of her real life, her office towers and charity galas and world where violence happened in spreadsheets, not with bullets. But Elena knew that empires crumbled in darkness, and Marcus's enemies had been watching, circling, waiting for exactly this kind of weakness. The attack came at midnight when the moon was hidden behind clouds, and the city held its breath. 3 cars full of rival operators who had heard whispers that the great Marcus Volkov had gone soft for a woman and a child. They came with guns and gasoline and an intention to destroy everything he had failed to protect. Marcus met them in his foyer, and the man Elena had almost convinced to lay down his weapons picked them up again with the ease of long practice and longer memory. But there were too many, and they had come prepared for war. A bullet caught him in the shoulder, spun him backward against a wall that bore photographs of his dead family. He heard Lily screaming from upstairs, heard Elena's voice sharp and commanding as she barricaded them in a bedroom, protecting his heart even though he had thrown hers away hours earlier. He fought like a man with nothing left to lose because that was precisely what he was. Bodies fell, glass shattered. Smoke began filling hallways that had just learned how to hold laughter again. Blood painted walls that Elena had made warm. The tide turned when Dmitri arrived with reinforcements, drawn by the silent alarm and loyalty that ran deeper than blood or reason. They drove the attackers back with the efficiency of men who had always known this night would eventually come. Marcus found himself on the marble floor, bleeding, while Elena knelt beside him, pressing her hands to his wound, her fingers slick with his blood. "Do not you dare die," she hissed, tears streaming down her face and mixing with his blood. "Do not you dare make me live with this, Marcus. Do not you dare leave me." He laughed, tasting copper and irony. "If there is a next life," he breathed, watching her face blur above him, feeling his vision narrow to a tunnel. "Do not test anyone. Just love them. It is simpler that way. It is kinder." She bent until her forehead touched his, until he could feel her breath against his mouth, until they were sharing air like they were one person. "I already loved you," she sobbed. "From the first moment I saw you stop your car in the rain. I just did not know how to stop lying to myself about why I came." His hand found her face, left blood on her cheek like war paint, like a mark that would never wash clean. "Then we are even," he whispered, as darkness pulled at him. "Because I started dying the day Grace and Samuel died. And you made me want to live instead. You made me remember what living felt like." Then the darkness took him, and Elena screamed his name into silence. Marcus woke in a hospital 3 days later to white walls and Elena's absence, which felt like waking up to death. The room smelled of antiseptic and failure. Dmitri sat beside his bed reading a newspaper, and when Marcus's eyes opened, he spoke before the question could form. "She is gone. Took the kid. Left a note." He handed over a piece of hospital stationery. The note was brief, written in handwriting that looked like her. "Thank you for teaching me that tests are for cowards. Love does not measure. It just gives. I gave you my heart. You gave me your trust. We are even. Forgive me." Marcus stared at those words until they stopped making sense, until they became just shapes on paper. Then he saw the television across the room playing a news broadcast about a charity gala, and there she was, Elena Castellano, CEO of the Heart Foundation, announcing a $300 million initiative for orphan children, standing in a ballroom that probably cost more to rent than most people earned in a year. She wore a black dress that fit her like it was designed specifically for her body, and on her wrist was the silver bracelet he had thrown at her feet. On her cheek, barely visible under expertly applied makeup, was a scar from where his bloodied hand had touched her face during the attack. The reporter, a young woman with perfect hair and practiced sympathy, asked why she had chosen this particular cause. Why now? Why so much money? Elena looked directly into the camera, and Marcus knew with absolute certainty she was looking at him, that every word was meant for him. "Because I met someone who reminded me that how we treat the most vulnerable among us reveals who we truly are," she said, voice steady and clear as crystal. "And I learned that lesson from a man the world had written off as irredeemable. He taught me that change is always possible if we are brave enough to want it. He taught me that goodness exists in unexpected places. He taught me what it means to protect someone even when it costs you everything." Marcus made Dmitri rewind the broadcast. Then again. Then 5 more times. On the 7th viewing, he finally stood up despite the pull of stitches and the protest of damaged muscle and the nurse who tried to stop him. "Find out where her next event is," he said, pulling the IV from his arm. Dmitri looked at him with something like concern, which was unprecedented. "Boss, she lied to you. She used you for an experiment. She made you vulnerable, and you nearly died because of it." Marcus met his eyes. "She saved my life. She threw herself between me and bullets. She loved my enemy's child like her own. She brought roses back from the dead. He reached for his clothes. Find her. I do not care what it costs. Find her. The charity gala was held in a hotel ballroom that sparkled like captured stars, full of people who wrote checks with more zeros than Marcus had killed men, which was saying something. He did not belong here among the champagne and the designer gowns and the conversations about tax deductions and social responsibility. He stood outside in falling snow, wearing a suit Dmitri had chosen because Marcus owned nothing appropriate for this world, feeling absurd and desperate and wholly uncertain about what he was doing or what he would say. 3 hours passed. His shoulder ached where stitches pulled. Snow gathered in his hair and on his shoulders like a benediction or a burial. He did not move. When Elena finally emerged, exhausted and polished and beautiful in a way that made his chest hurt, she nearly walked past him. Then she stopped mid-step as if struck, turned slowly. Snow caught in her dark hair like a crown of temporary light. "You should not be here," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word, giving her away completely. "I know." He stepped closer, and she did not retreat. "I spent my whole life hurting people. I was good at it. It made sense to me. I understood violence. I understood fear. I understood how to make people do what I wanted through force and threat." Another step, close enough now to see her breath fog the air between them. "Then you came, and nothing made sense anymore. You made me want to be something I do not know how to be. You made me want to be worthy of the way you looked at me before you knew I knew the truth." She shook her head, tears forming on her lashes and freezing there. "Marcus, I lied to you. I used you for an experiment. I invaded your life under false pretenses. How can you possibly I know?" he interrupted, pulling the silver bracelet from his pocket. The one she had left behind in the hospital. The one he had carried like a talisman. "And I have killed people. I have destroyed families. I have done things that would make you sick if you knew the details. We are both covered in sins we cannot wash off, Elena. We are both broken in ways that cannot be fixed." He held the bracelet between them like an offering. "But you are the only person who ever made me want to try to be better. You are the only one who made me remember what it feels like to be human instead of just useful or feared." Elena stared at the bracelet, then at his face, searching for deception and finding only raw honesty that probably hurt him to offer. "I do not know if I can trust this. I do not know if you can trust me after what I did." He held out the bracelet. "Then let us be terrified together. Let us build something neither of us knows how to build. Let us fail at it and try again, and keep trying until we get it right or until it kills us. But let us try." She took the bracelet, and when he tried to fasten it around her wrist, his hands shook so badly she had to help him with the clasp, their fingers tangling together. Then she pulled him down into the falling snow and kissed him like forgiveness, like beginning, like the end of loneliness, and the start of everything else. "No more tests," she breathed against his mouth. "Just this. Just us. Just real and messy and true." He kissed her forehead, the scar on her cheek, her trembling hands. "Just real," he agreed, and meant it with everything he had left. 6 months later, they held their wedding in the garden Marcus had thought was dead forever. The roses Elena had saved bloomed in wild profusion, red and white and pink, perfuming the air with impossible sweetness that felt like redemption made tangible and visible. There were no elaborate decorations, no string quartet, no hundreds of guests in expensive clothes making small talk about nothing. Just a simple wooden arch covered in vines, folding chairs arranged in uneven rows on grass that had learned to grow again, and the people who had witnessed their collision and survived it. Lily scattered rose petals down a makeshift aisle, laughing as they caught in her hair, wearing a dress the color of spring that Elena had made herself. Marcus's men sat in the back rows, uncomfortable in suits that did not hide weapons well but were an attempt at respect, and they came. All of them came. They stood when Elena walked down the aisle in a dress the color of cream, holding wildflowers instead of expensive arrangements. No music except the wind chimes singing. Marcus waited for her under the arch with tears already streaming down his face, not bothering to hide them or apologize for them. When she reached him, she whispered, "You are crying at your own wedding." He laughed through tears, took her hands. "I am crying because I thought I was dead. I thought I died 7 years ago with Grace and Samuel. And you made me realize I was just sleeping. You woke me up." The officiant, a woman named Margaret who ran one of Elena's shelters and knew both their stories in full, kept the ceremony brief but meaningful. But when it came time for vows, Marcus spoke first. Voice rough with emotion he no longer tried to hide or control. I do not have pretty words. I do not know how to make promises without the fear of breaking them. But I promise you this. I spent my life being a weapon. You are teaching me how to be a shield instead. How to protect instead of destroy. How to build instead of burn. I will fail sometimes. I will fall back into old patterns. But I will keep trying, because you are worth becoming someone new for. You are worth the work of transformation. Elena squeezed his hands, tears running freely, unashamed. I tested you because I was afraid to trust anyone after David died. But you taught me that trust is not about proof or evidence. It is about faith. It is about choosing to believe in someone's capacity for good even when they have done terrible things. And I have faith in you. In us. In what we can build from all these broken pieces. They exchanged rings, simple silver bands that had belonged to no one else, that carried no histories but the ones they would make together starting now. When they kissed, Lily cheered so loudly that even the hardened criminals in the back rows smiled, some of them wiping away tears they would deny later. The reception was held in Marcus's house, the house Elena had transformed from a tomb into a home that knew how to breathe and laugh. Dmitri made an awkward toast about redemption that made everyone cry, even the men who claimed they had forgotten how. Victor admitted he had started volunteering at one of Elena's shelters, teaching kids about machines the way Marcus had taught Lily, giving them skills and purpose. Marcus held Elena close while they danced to the piano song he had finally finished, the melody that had waited 7 years for its resolution, for its ending that was actually a beginning. She rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling it match her own. What are we going to do now? She asked. He kissed the top of her head. Build something that helps instead of hurts. Together. Everything together from now on. She smiled against his chest. I am going to hold you to that. Good, he murmured into her hair. I need someone who will not let me forget who I want to be. As evening faded into night, Marcus and Elena stood together in the rose garden, watching their unlikely guests mingle and discover they had more in common than violence and survival. Lily chased fireflies with Victor's daughter, a child Marcus had not even known existed until tonight, and their laughter carried on warm air that smelled like flowers and second chances. The garden glowed with string lights Elena had hung herself, and the roses she had saved bloomed like they had never known death or abandonment. She leaned into Marcus, the bracelet on her wrist catching light, becoming a small constellation. I never thanked you, she said quietly. He turned to look at her, genuinely confused. For what? You gave me everything. You saved my life in more ways than one. She gestured at everything around them, the garden and the house, and the people who had learned to coexist, despite their differences, despite their pasts, for being exactly who you needed to be when I found you, for proving my test wrong. I came looking for hearts in unexpected places, measuring compassion in men the world had dismissed. But I did not expect to lose my own heart. I did not expect to be the one who was tested and found wanting. Marcus wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. I think you found your heart, right where it belonged, with me, with us. She turned in his embrace, studied his face in the gentle light. No more being a crime boss? He considered that carefully, honestly. No more being the kind of boss who rules by fear and violence. But I still have resources, connections. Elena, we could use those to actually help people. Real, systemic change instead of just charity checks that make donors feel good. We could transform what I built into something that matters. Her eyes widened with something like hope or possibility or both. You are serious. You made me want to be better, he said simply. So let me be better. Let us build something together, a foundation of our own. One that does not test people, but just helps them. One that gives without measuring. She kissed him softly, tasting salt and promises and the future. I love you. Even when I was lying about everything else, that was always true. From the very beginning it was true. I know, he said. I knew even when I was angry. Some truths do not need words. Some truths just are. They stood together as stars emerged above them, as the roses released their perfume into cooling air, as their guests danced and laughed and proved that change was possible for anyone brave enough to reach for it, to believe in it, to do the work of becoming. Later, when everyone had left and the house was quiet and the moon was high, Marcus carved words into a wooden sign while Elena watched by lantern light. When he finished, he hung it on the garden gate. She read the inscription aloud. Where darkness learns to love, light will stay. She traced the letters with her fingers, tears sliding down her face in the moonlight. It is perfect. It is us. Marcus pulled her close. We are not perfect. We will never be perfect. But we are real. We are trying. And that is better than perfect could ever be. Above them, stars continued their ancient vigil over a world that held both violence and grace. Around them, roses bloomed in defiance of every ending, proof that resurrection was possible with patience and care. And in the house that had once been a place of fear, laughter echoed through halls like a promise finally kept, like a debt finally paid, like love that had learned how to exist in darkness without being consumed by it. They walked inside together, hands linked, leaving the garden gate open behind them. Anyone who needed sanctuary could find it here now. Where darkness had learned to love, light would always stay.